Don't get so angry, I'll buy another one and return it to you. I had my husband's watch stolen by a neighbor who is notorious in the neighborhood for her messiness. And it was worth $18,000 at the time. You're really gonna replace it, right? I decided to tell this neighbor, who's keeping her cool composure, the truth after my final confirmation. My name is Donna William. I live in an average household. I work part-time from morning until noon and take care of the house in the evenings. My husband is currently working abroad on a job assignment. We have one child, and through that child, I became friends with a neighbor, Sandra Smith. However, I was shocked to learn one day. Sandra was the notorious in the neighborhood for her messiness. And she's crafty, with a habit of taking things from those she befriended and then cutting off all contacts afterwards. I heard such stories from victims of her and had stopped inviting Sandra to my home. Still, Sandra would frequently try to visit my home. Lately, she's been showing up without even calling in advance. Even when I told her it was inconvenient, Sandra wouldn't listen. Distressed, I called my husband and we installed security cameras. Today, my shift ended half-day. As soon as I got home, the doorbell rang. I had a bad feeling and looked through the peephole. Sure enough, there was Sandra. I thought of pretending I wasn't home for a moment, but Sandra kept ringing the doorbell over and over.
Hey! I know you're in there! Come out already!
She banged on the door roughly. Not wanting to stir up rumors in the neighborhood, I opened the door. Seeing that, Sandra snorted and walked in without asking.
Weren't you just pretending to be out just now?
When she gave me that glaring look, I said, "It's not like that," and poured some coffee. I've got plans today, I told her, but Sandra just wouldn't listen. She sat lazily on the couch, holding snacks she'd taken from the shelf without asking. This isn't that good. And it's instant coffee. You're treating me pretty rough for a guest, aren't ya? I'm sorry. I just got home from work. What brings you here? I was surprised since you didn't call ahead. We're friends, right? Do I always gotta let you know? I told her that's not the point and tried to end the conversation with her quickly. Ever since I started avoiding Sandra, she's been making snide remarks and complaints like she did just now. Her selfish behavior also started around that time.
My husband's gonna be late today. Oh, maybe you could invite me for dinner? You're gonna be alone anyway, right?
No, my child will be home soon.
So what? One more person won't hurt, right?
Listening to Sandra's audacious comments, I was upset deep down. But I couldn't outright refuse, and that night, I ended up having dinner with Sandra. After we ate, Sandra went through my kitchen and even started drinking. After soothing my worried child to sleep, I went to the living room where a tipsy Sandra awaited. It's getting late. As I started to say this to Sandra, she glared at me with a wine in one hand and a bright red face. You telling me to leave? I came all this way to hang out. Sandra frowned, clearly unhappy. She seemed pretty drunk. Since then, she slurred her words, scolding me and insisting that if I wanted her to leave, I should drive her home. I couldn't, especially with my sleeping child at home alone. But Sandra just started making sarcastic remarks again, as if ignited. At that moment, I noticed the bottle of wine Sandra had opened. It was the wine I had been saving to drink with my husband. I had saved up from my part-time job to buy that wine, a $1,000 bottle. I couldn't help but raise my voice.
Did you drink that wine all by yourself?
This one? Yeah. Got a problem?
That bottle costs $1,000. I bought it for a special occasion, to open on our anniversary.
Sandra then laughed heartily. Seeing my frustration, she mocked me, saying, "It's just $1,000. My husband is a doctor, so he can buy as much of this wine as we want." Your husband really doesn't earn much, does he? Sandra said, mocking my husband in the process. I was so frustrated, I bit my lip. Come on. Getting so upset over just a cheap bottle of wine? You're so petty. If anything, you should be grateful. Someone with taste like mine is drinking your wine.
Enough is enough. Please leave now.
But Sandra just gave a nonchalant reply and made a phone call. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Wondering who could it be at this hour, I checked the video intercom and there stood Sandra's husband.
Finally, you're here,
Sandra said as she staggered toward the door, leaving her mess behind. I couldn't just let her go on dropping things everywhere, so I helped her to the door. My husband is a doctor and he's super busy. He earns a lot and still comes to pick me up. I'm so lucky to have such a wonderful husband. Isn't your husband working out of state? He's hardly ever home. Maybe he's got someone else over there? Sandra chuckled mischievously. I was starting to feel repulsed by Sandra's baseless speculations. I just wanted her to leave and never come back. Although I glared at her with all my might, she didn't seem to care.
You should leave your husband and snag an elite one like mine. But I guess that's too much for you,
Sandra said cheerfully as she left. Her husband gave me a pained look, nodded silently, and went after her. 2 days later. Right after I returned from shopping, Sandra showed up again. I'm pretty busy today, I mentioned, but Sandra replied, I just need to use the restroom. I was hesitant, but then thought, what's the harm in letting her use the bathroom? Just then, a delivery arrived. Rushing to the front door in a hurry to receive it, I found Sandra comfortably lounging in the living room when I returned. As I exclaimed, oh, I noticed Sandra smirking and munching on the cake I had stored in the fridge.
Just taking a little break.
This is horrible. I shouldn't have let her in. I tried to tell her I had chores to do, but Sandra showed no signs of leaving. Frustrated, I left Sandra in the living room and went back to my chores. That was a mistake. When I finished cleaning up the kids' room and returned to the living room, I found Sandra rummaging through my shelves, apparently looking for anything valuable.
Hey, stop that. What the heck are you doing?
I hurriedly grabbed the box that held my husband's treasured watch. Sandra shot me a displeased glare.
Hey, why is this watch stored so carefully? What's the story?
I tried to dodge the question, but Sandra pressed on. Reluctantly, I explained. It's a limited edition from overseas, cost about $18,000 back then. My husband always said to handle it with gloves to avoid fingerprints. He's a big watch enthusiast. Sandra uninterestedly replied, huh? Just $18,000 and you treat it like it's gold. Guess some folks just show their colors. If I ask my husband, he could buy dozens for that price. With a smug look, Sandra snatched the watch box from me. If you've got stuff to do, I'll put this back for you. Saying that, Sandra put it back on the shelf. I told her not to do it again, and then I headed to clean the bathroom. But I let my guard down. I completely forgot that Sandra had a habit of taking things from people's homes without asking. It was just when I finished my chores. Want some tea? When I said that, Sandra responded with a surprising, no thanks. And then, she hurriedly grabbed her bag and headed for the front door. Shocked, I rushed after her. Sandra gave me a sidelong glance, smirking, as she reached for the door.
I was gonna leave after the break anyway. I'll be back soon.
Her quicker than usual departure made me suspicious. I had a feeling something fishy was going on. I quickly checked the security camera I had set up in the living room using my phone app. To my surprise, there was Sandra, putting that $18,000 watch into her bag without permission. When I checked the shelf, sure enough, one of the watches was missing. I immediately called her.
Sandra, my watch is missing. Did you take it without asking?
But Sandra just denied it, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Yet, I clearly saw Sandra putting the watch in her bag. I pleaded with Sandra to return it, thinking there's no way she didn't know. But she snapped back, enough. I'm not interested in such cheap stuff. Maybe you lost it. Stop blaming others.
It's not cheap. It's part of my husband's collection. Poor folks are always so suspicious. Don't call me over such nonsense. Just buy a new one. Heck, I'll even buy you a replacement.
Sandra said that with a stubborn attitude, refusing to admit any wrongdoing. Though I wanted to shout at her, I figured she would just deny everything anyway. I guess I'll have to involve the police.
I'm definitely getting it back.
With that, I hung up on Sandra. And then I immediately called my husband. Your watch. Look, the limited edition worth $18,000 got stolen. I know who took it, but they're playing dumb. I'm thinking of reporting it to the police. If you have photos or a proof of purchase, I'd like to see them. Then, William cried out in horror, his voice trembling. Turns out, that watch is one of the few in the world, a premium piece. Moreover, it has a unique mechanism that's no longer in circulation. If it breaks, it's irreplaceable. In the collector's world, it's sought after and now worth more than $18,000.
What? The other day at an auction, the starting bid was over $200,000. It's gonna keep rising in value.
I felt dizzy hearing that. I hurriedly took the photo of the watch William gave me and the proof of purchase from the shelf and ran to the police station. I had no idea it was such a luxury item. Once I reported the theft to the police, they acted immediately due to its high value. I wanted to call Sandra and inform her that I was coming over with the police, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Hoping the watch would be safe, I headed straight to Sandra's house. After ringing the doorbell several times without a response, the police showed their badge and urged her to come out. Then, looking annoyed, Sandra appeared.
Really? Bringing the police is an overreaction. You're trying to corner me without any evidence, aren't you?
Sandra said that with a smirk on her face. My irritation with Sandra reached its peak.
We have evidence.
I quickly showed her the security camera footage on my phone. The footage clearly showed Sandra putting William's watch into her bag. Sandra gasped upon seeing the video. Setting up a security camera in your home? This footage looks like it's just meant to make me look bad. I was just thinking of borrowing it for a while.
That's not borrowing, that's stealing.
I reprimanded Sandra. But she just laughed off my desperation and didn't take it seriously. It's just $18,000, right?
What if it breaks? It can't be fixed anymore.
When I said that, Sandra smirked and replied, "Don't get so mad, I'll just buy another one and give it back." Such an arrogant attitude without any sense of guilt. I couldn't tolerate Sandra's attitude and raised my voice. You steal someone's precious item and have the nerve to act like this? I know you've been taking things from various people without permission. When I said that, Sandra's face turned red and her eyes narrowed.
Excuse me. Stop making these weird accusations.
Sandra muttered, "This is why I hate poor folks," looking at me with an exasperated expression. The feeling is mutual. I asked the police, "Can't you arrest her?" And the officers said they could if they had evidence and if the stolen watch was in this house. You'll never get inside my place. All this fuss over a mere $18,000? I could sue you for defamation. Sandra said that glaring at me. I glared right back at her. Can I ask something? If you claim you borrowed it, you still have the watch with you, right? You haven't lost it or sold it? Of course. I just borrowed it. Even if I lost it, I'd compensate. $18,000 is nothing considering my husband's earnings. Sandra said, flaunting a smug smile. Acting so confident, laughing like she still has the watch. So, you really gonna buy it and give it back? When I pressed further, Sandra, out of frustration, promised she would buy and return it if it was damaged or lost. To make sure she couldn't weasel out of it, I recorded her words on my phone.
Why are you so persistent? Do you really want to paint me as a thief? It's just a watch after all.
I told Sandra what my husband had told me. Actually, when that watch was purchased, it was $18,000. Now, it's become a collector's item and is worth at least $200,000. Sandra, hearing my words, stammered and started to sweat.
No way. That's a bluff. You're trying to trick me.
It's true. Look at this. I showed her a screen my husband sent me. On an auction website, the price has now soared to $280,000. Sandra stared at the screen, her face pale as stone. If you return the stolen item now, I won't ask you to buy it. When I said that, Sandra frantically rummaged through her bag by the entrance. Then, she roughly handed over something. It was my husband's watch. But the face was cracked and it had scratches.
What? How did this happen?
When I looked at Sandra in shock, she defensively claimed it was broken from the start. I told her that couldn't be the case, but Sandra kept insisting she didn't know. I decided to show Sandra a picture my husband had taken. This is a picture my husband took when he got home this month. It isn't broken, right? Then, Sandra started accusing me of breaking it. I shook my head in denial. I never touch my husband's collection with my bare hands. He always uses gloves, too. You remember me explaining that, right? If we do a fingerprint test, we'll instantly know who broke it.
You can't prove anything. You might have wiped it down after touching it.
Well, let's do this then. We have a week's worth of security footage. Let's review it and see if I ever touched it with my bare hands. If the only person we see touching it is you, that's pretty incriminating, isn't it? I handed over my phone to the police. The officers checked it immediately. Sandra, with a pale face, tried to stop both me and the police, but she was apprehended on the spot. I won't let this slide. You promised, right? If it's broken or lost, you'd buy a replacement.
I never said that.
Yes, you did. I've got the recording. Stop resisting now. Admit to what you did and take responsibility. Upon hearing this, Sandra finally gave in and began explaining herself. Apparently, she was just jealous that I had expensive items. I was utterly flabbergasted by her behavior and had no intention of forgiving her actions. Take responsibility for what you've done. I told her this and decided to leave the rest to the police. In the end, Sandra was arrested on suspicion of theft and vandalism. Subsequent searches of her house revealed other luxury items she had stolen from the neighbors. While Sandra claimed they were all borrowed, the victims refuted her claims. If the evidence continues to pile up, she'll likely end up in jail. I told Sandra that if she paid me back for the watch, I would drop the charges. Hearing that, she begged her husband, saying she didn't want to go to prison. However, it seemed her husband had grown weary of her excessive spending and brash attitude, and he decided to cut ties. Ultimately, Sandra couldn't afford to buy back the watch. Her husband billed her for the significant repair costs, leaving her in debt. With Sandra no longer coming around, I felt at ease. My husband returned home after his overseas assignment. Using the compensation we received, we hired a skilled watchmaker, and thankfully, my husband's watch was restored to its former glory. Now, my child, husband, and I live happily together.